welcome to Daily Debrief. I'm Pragya. On the show today, we have the latest on the Iran nuclear deal, the extradition of Julian Assange, and updates on the election in Colombia. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Agreement, also known as the Iran nuclear deal, has hit another stumbling block. 49 of 50 Republican senators have refused to accept the United States re-entering the deal, which it unilaterally walked out of in 2018. They have expressed their preference for continuing with and extending economic sanctions against Iran over re-entering the deal on terms they find now unacceptable. This is right after Russia said on Saturday it wants to be left out of the sanctions regime imposed by the United States over Iran. The Iranian foreign minister headed for Russia on Tuesday for talks with his Russian counterpart. Iran has once again said it is the United States which is to blame for the talks going nowhere. 8 rounds of talks have been held to revive the JCPOA in Vienna. Joining us is Prabir Purkasta for more on this development. Prabir, can you give us a brief idea of why this deal is stuck in permanent non-agreement phase? What are the implications of this?
The larger issue which you are raising is that the United States has become treaty incapable. That's because domestically it is completely divided. What one president does, the other president comes, if he's from the other party, and undoes, which is what Trump did for the Obama deal, and which now when Biden is trying, Trump has said, and the Republicans are saying, we will not accept whatever is being done by this president. So the indication of the senators that you talked about, 49 of them, they might in the Senate try to block it in different ways. But the more important part of it is that in any case, the deal will be dead if 2024 new president comes in the United States, as it is likely to be, and is from the Republican side. So that is the larger picture, that the United States has not managed to stick to any agreement it has negotiated. Is it climate? Let it be the Iran deal or anything else for that matter. So that's the larger picture. Coming to the one which is immediately that we are talking about, the JCPOA, or as you said, the Iran nuclear deal. There, the issue was Trump walked out of the deal in the belief that if he put more pressure, if the United States puts more pressure on Iran, Iran will buckle down and accept a condition that it will not interfere in the rest of West Asia. That means it will let the Americans and its allies, Israel being the key one, roughshod over everything else in West Asia, and they would not be able to resist it. Handing over West Asia completely to the United States, in other words. So that was the other part of this, and also a capping of its missile program. Now, that was never on the cards, because that means it will become militarily much weaker than, for instance, Saudi Arabia or even United Arab Emirates, who spend much more money on their budget, defense budgets, than Iran does. So this was a non-starter from the beginning, but that's what Trump's goal was, at least open goal was. And behind that was the fact that if you don't do it, we might invade you. That's the other part of it. Or we'll strike you in a way that we'll be able to dismantle your nuclear infrastructure. Now that, again, is something that didn't work. So therefore, when Biden or the United States has come back to the deal, it is in the condition, in the context that Iran has now reached again a situation where it has got an inventory of enriched uranium to the level, the breakout time, as it is said, from now to when they will be able to explode a bomb. That's the argument of the breakout time. That has lengthened to a few months, if not 1 month. So given that, they are not going to be able to put the genie back in the bottle again, which is go back to the old deal. Iran has said, okay, now certain things we'll have to consider. The new centrifuges will stay. We're not agreeing to anything regarding extending this into further discussions regarding, say, missiles and policy, foreign policy, external policy of Iran. Those are off the table. And we'll also need certain guarantees that if, for instance, you reimpose sanctions on us into 2024, which is likely, then what are the things that we can do? Now we should write that also in the treaty. Then we have the right to do A, B, C, D. So those are the kind of things which were there. And the Iranians had got some concessions that the kind of centrifuges they had, they'll replace by newer centrifuges they already have.
Right.
They're not going to go back on that also. So all of those, it seems to have been accepted. It was not so much the 49 Congress senators who raised this issue, but the fact that the previous negotiator of the deal, he came out and saying we are accepting far more concessions, we are giving far more concessions than we should, and therefore this is really something bad, and this is widely shared, and Biden is in the back foot on that. As well as the fact the Russians have said, okay, we lift the sanctions, we agree all of this, but then Iran and Russia, anything that is transacted there, that should not come under the sanctions you have imposed on us, Russia. So given this, Biden seems to be at the moment unwilling to face the opposition internally because he has a relatively difficult Ukraine-Russia problem to solve, in which he needs everybody to be with him to financially and economically isolate Russia or his economic war against Russia. So that is his priority. Somewhere Iran has now fallen into or has gone into a back burner. And I think that is also the problem, that we are having two parallel sets of issues is not what the United States can handle at this stage.
What is the role of Russia here really? After Afghanistan, it looked like America isn't strong enough to really impose its will. Iran is not going to be a walkover for even the American forces. Now, is there a war option really on the table right now?
Well, that's a good question that you need to ask the United States senators who want really war with Russia in the morning and with Iran in the evening. So that's a different issue over there. But if you look at the Iran issue, the United States not doing anything and letting the sanctions continue is a de facto normal state for the United States. Of course, then Iran progresses in the direction it wants, and we have a new scenario that emerges therefore. Then the ball is set rolling. Should we have another war against Iran? Should we attack it like we attacked Iraq? Because the bloodthirstiness of the American military establishment seems to be enormous. Even though they know that you really can't fight a war against Iran. You could not occupy and keep Iraq with you. What's the chance of keeping Iran, which is much bigger? There's really no chance. So they know all that. But in spite of that, the military establishment, more than that, the military industrial complex, which is the weapons manufacturers, all of them, they want a quasi-war, not a real war, which is much more dangerous. So I think we are seeing the incapacity of the US to reach any really a conclusion which is helpful either to their domestic policies, their country, and of course for the global order, because it conflicts with the desire for global hegemony. And I think that's what you really have a problem with at the moment. And this is why it's not able to come to an understanding which seems to be relatively in the interest of everybody. You said Russia and Iran. You know, Russia has to take the enriched uranium. Otherwise, who's going to take that? Are they going to give it to? So they are willing to give it to the Russians, nobody else. So those are some of the issues which are there, which is why Russia is a guarantor to the JCPOA. Iran needs somebody whom it can trust. It can't trust the West European countries. It cannot trust the United States. So this is the only country which they thought was neutral enough to accept a deal in which you have other parties as well who are inimical to you. So China doesn't play that role. Russia was playing that role. And now if Russia cannot play that role because of the sanctions, then what do they do? This, I think, is the question for them.
All right, Prabir, thank you. WikiLeaks founder, journalist and publisher Julian Assange has been denied permission to appeal at Britain's Supreme Court against a decision to extradite him to the United States. The court said yesterday, March 14, that the appeal to prevent extradition did not raise any point of law. While Assange's extradition must still be approved by the government, effectively US Home Secretary Preeti Patel, Monday's decision is a serious blow to his effort to fight deportation. A reminder, US authorities want Assange, who has already been in different stages of confinement for over a decade, to face trial on 18 counts related to WikiLeaks' release of troves of confidential US military records and diplomatic cables. Anish has been covering the story for People's Dispatch. What happens now, Anish?
So the process-wise, if you look at it, there are still two layers of process. One is they can still go back to the district court, the magistrates, the Westminster Magistrates Court, back to Vanessa Barretzer, the original judge who struck down the extradition request in January 2021. And in that, they can actually bring back some of the grounds that they failed to convince the judge over, including conditions in US prisons, despite the diplomatic assurances that the United States very belatedly gave UK last year after the judgment, after they failed the extradition thing. But also other matters like his rights as a journalist, because what Assange is being prosecuted for is essentially for publishing classified documents, and this is a very open infringement of his rights as a journalist to be protected from any kind of intimidation, any kind of threats from the state, including foreign actors. And this is being violated with this indictment, especially when the state itself has been exposed of committing massive war crimes, has a history of targeting him. In fact, we have seen last year multiple exposés where we talk about this, his assassination attempts, his, plans made by the United States CIA to assassinate or kidnap him, or other things like where they spied on him for nearly a year, collecting classified information about him, including his personal life. So these are things that they might bring up. And this can happen like before June. At least we cannot be expecting anything much from the Home Office, but depending on how the new the new application goes in the district court, we will see Priti Patel making a decision. Once the final decision is being made, they can go for a final appeal. But the issue is bigger because this only prolongs the judicial process. And that means that he remains in jail for the foreseeable
a decade. Anish, are journalists all over the world, the investigative journalists, going to look at this with alarm and concern once again?
Exactly. I mean, this is something that is already alarming because now the decision is going to be essentially political. We are looking at somebody who is a political appointee, not a judicial person. Like, they are essentially part of the administration elected by a political party, and they are a political appointee. That makes the decision itself quite political, and it is not going to be any more bound by any kind of rule of law or any kind of checks and balances that the judiciary has to go through, where they have to give reasons for why they're giving so-and-so decision. Priti Patel might as well just say, like, can disregard even the district court's observations, if not the ruling, and say that she will nevertheless go for the extradition. So this is the sort of situation we are at right now. And
what kind of a sentence are we looking at if his extradition really works out? It would be
we are looking at something like about 175 years of maximum prison sentence. And obviously they will not go for the entire thing, but they will definitely try to keep him in prison for a very long time. Because he's already 50, his health is not doing very well. He actually has a couple of mental health issues, including the fact that he was found multiple times by different experts that he's a suicide risk in the case if extradition becomes imminent. So these are factors that are not being considered that were not considered when the High Court struck down the lower court judgment. And these are other factors, but also come in where you are looking at the chilling effect it might have over the period of time once the extradition happens. As I'm saying, like, the judicial process being prolonged means Assange is going to remain in prison. He's already going to be completing 3 years in Belmarsh alone. It's a very high security prison for federal crimes. Like, that's the sort of things that the people are there for. And he's a journalist inside there. So he's essentially a political prisoner, staying there being detained there without charge under judicial remand. And it's already going to be 3 years next month. So he's already, serving a prison sentence without actually even getting a conviction in the first place,
Right.
even if it's in another country. Will that be counted? We don't know if there's another prison sentence happening in the United States. Either way, he's going to be detained in high security prisons, whether it be in the United Kingdom or the United States, and that as long as the whole process of law goes through.
Thank you, Anish, for that. In Colombia, voters have signaled change, bringing up leftist and former guerrilla member Gustavo Petro as the definitive winner in the presidential primaries. He has gained double the votes of any of his competitors. We have Prashant from People's Dispatch with us. Right, so Prashant, what are the salient aspects of the results that we've seen coming from Colombia?
So, right, Pragya, two election processes which are kind of parallel took place, which led to these results, of course. Now, the first one is for the parliamentary, the two houses of parliament, the Senate and the Chamber of Representatives. And what we see here happening is that the historic pact coalition, which is the left-wing coalition, has performed quite well. Now, this is a proportional representation system, which means that, it's a very widely split parliament, so to speak. So it's not that one party has a huge majority or anything. A lot of parties have a small number of seats. But the historic pact coalition led by Gustavo Petro, who you were referring to, has secured the maximum number of seats in the Senate. Now, if you look at the House of, or it was tied to the Conservative Party rather. And if you look at the Chamber of Representatives, it is 28 seats and it came out of a total of 162 and it came second. So this is actually quite an impressive performance by the historic pact coalition, because we do know that the left and progressive forces in Colombia have generally been suppressed. They have been targeted, they have been attacked. We'll come to a bit more about that later. But this in some senses I think indicates the very strong feeling and demand for change that is coursing throughout Colombia, so to speak, because the kind of situation there is really, really bad. The right-wing government of Juan Duque has been a complete disaster. So in that sense, it is a reaffirmation of the growing strength of the left on the one hand. It is a sign of the dissatisfaction of the people with the current regime on the other, and it is a positive. It is a sign in terms of, it is a positive sign as far as the left is concerned for the presidential elections which are coming in May. Now, the second round of process actually were the primaries within each bloc, or party, so to speak, in which the candidates for the elections, or the candidates for the presidential election would be determined. So in the case of the historic pact coalition, we have Gustavo Petro, who was by overwhelming majority has become the presidential candidate of his alliance. We have a former mayor, I think his name is Fernando Gutierrez. He has become the major candidate of the right wing, so to speak. Important thing to note is that Ivan Duque's party also has a candidate, but that candidate is likely to perform quite badly. In fact, President Ivan Duque's party performed quite poorly in the parliamentary elections as well. They were one of the leading parties in the Chamber of Representatives. They had quite a steep fall as far as they're concerned, and the Senate also, I think they're fourth if I'm not mistaken. So again, a very clear sign of dissatisfaction with the ruling party. So this is of course in some senses setting the scene for the major elections that are going to happen on May 29th. Gustavo Petro currently is in what is called the pole position, so to speak, but we never know because there is a history of, on the one hand there is a history of a lot of irregularities in polling, there is a history of a lot of violence. On the other hand, the consolidation of the right wing can never be underestimated. But Gustavo Petro right now looks like he has, he is at a bit of an advantage, so to speak. Also, and which is why I said these parliamentary elections also are a hint that this is a possibility that he might end up in a good position. And we have the the first round of the presidential elections coming up on May 29th, and the second round taking place in June, depending on the results of the first round, of course. So that is what these round of elections are about, but kind of the semi-finals, so to speak. Also important because the strong showing of the right in the previous parliament was key for Ivan Duque to enact many of his more problematic policies. So the fact that there is no decisive mandate for the right is important in this case. And
what are the implications of this for Colombia?
So I would say that the important thing is the elections coming up in May 29th, because Ivan Duque, the current president, is the ideological successor of Alvaro Uribe, who is one of the most notorious presidents of recent times in Colombia, both for the atrocities that were committed during his times and the massive corruption that he was involved in. And Duque, like I said, Duque was his head. And during Duque's period, the Colombian government has been a complete disappointment in many ways. Colombia has handled the COVID-19 pandemic very, very badly. There's been a lot of unhappiness due to the extreme impact that the pandemic has had on Colombia, which has been exacerbated by the work of the government. In addition to that, there's been a huge amount of continuing violence, social violence related to the ongoing conflict that was there in the past. There was a set of peace agreements that were signed in Havana in 2016. Ivan Duque's government was quick to abandon them. And in the time since, we have seen attack after attack on social leaders, on activists, on demobilized militants, for instance. I think around 1,200 such social leaders, activists, and former combatants of the FARC rebel group have been killed since 2016. Over 90 massacres of civilians have taken place in the last year alone. So there's been this systemic social violence in Colombia, and we need to understand that this is not random incidents of violence. This is a kind of systemic violence in which the role of the state is very complicit in its own way, and there is clearly a green signal as far as such violence is concerned. And simultaneously, we also saw that there was a huge uprising that took place in Colombia last year throughout April, May and June. Massive numbers of people taking to the streets. The images were broadcast across the world of the kind of protests that were taking place. And all this has actually taken, I think, dissatisfaction to the current system with the current government to really its boiling point. And which is why the historic pact, for instance, is able to achieve, Gustavo Petro is able to win. It will mark a break from many years of the same kind of parties alternating between each other in terms of forming the government with very little difference in policies. Petro is a far more progressive candidate. He was the mayor of Bogota earlier, and at that point he had been he had gained great acclaim for the kind of progressive policies he brought, for the strengthening of the public sector, for the fact that he tried to bring in more jobs, and all around his entire policy framework was very much within what you would call the progressive progressive side, as opposed to the neoliberal model of policy making which people like Ivan Duque and his predecessors have been implementing. So also especially important because Colombia is one of the most important allies of the United States in the region. So it has been one of those frontline states in attacking other progressive regimes. It has been one of the frontline states in the attack on Venezuela, for instance. Ivan Duque has been a very strong ally in that process of the United States. So the fact that as Gustavo Petro comes to power, it could mark a very vital turning point in a process that is already taking place in Latin America. So very, very important elections in Colombia, not just for the country, but for the entire continent.
Thanks, Prashant. That's all we have on Daily Debrief today. Do follow us on social media and visit us on peoplesdispatch.org.